It's also a very special day today because of the people we are celebrating. I think it is so important to acknowledge with great pride Kekoo and Khorshed Gandhi. I had the good fortune of knowing them personally and, of course, of knowing their daughters. Behroze I've met very recently, and Adil I have been trying to get online, but he's lost his voice and he's in a stud farm in Bangalore. So I hope he'll join us. But if not this week, then next week. This is why I wanted to say it's a very special session because this is our first Friday forum in two parts. Uh, I'm going to be introducing Behroze and the family in a few seconds, but uh, we are going to have next Friday Behroze Gandhi's special tribute called Kekee Manzil. And that is going to be another, it's the whole film's going to be played, and hopefully Adil's throat will be better by then, and we'll have him with us. So thank you, viewers, and a warm welcome to Behroze, Rashna, as well as Shireen and Adil. Uh, we are really today an international family gathering because Behroze is in London, Rashna, no, sorry, she's in the Isle of Wight. Rashna is in Switzerland, as far as I can remember. Shireen is wandering between some parts of Europe, and Adil, as I told you, is in Bangalore. And Matab is in Spain, and I'm in Delhi. So all of you welcome. And with that, uh, I just want to say a few words about Kekoo and Khorshed Gandhi. I think they need to be acknowledged, and sadly, they have not been acknowledged either by the community of the Parsis or by the larger art community of India and the world, which all of us, we owe them so much. Uh, you're going to see some amazing things today. And what I want to say thank you to them for is that they provided space, an actual home sometimes, for artists, for thinkers, for all those who have worked to preserve safe creative spaces and allow creative spirits to flourish, which is why they were catalysts for creative spaces at a time when India was just about forming its own policies. And with Chemould Gallery, the siblings have also gone very far, but we all owe a big thank you to Kekoo and Khorshed. With that, let me hand you over to Behroze. Behroze, welcome. Thank you for being with us, Rashna, Behroze, and I hope I will see Shirin somewhere and Adil. But welcome, all of you. Thank you so much for being with us and for all the trouble you have taken to make this presentation.
Hello, everyone. And it's a special privilege to be invited by you, Shanaz, on your fifth birthday. Uh, I'm delighted to be doing this presentation. It's an opportunity to expand on the film that I made, which you're going to see next week. The film, as Shanaz says, is called Kekee Manzil, House of Art. But my parents, who lived to the ripe old age of 90 plus in Kekoo's case, had such a sort of rich and varied life that I found it very hard to fit in all the elements in a 90-minute documentary. So I welcome this opportunity to talk particularly about other things that weren't covered. So let me start with 1944. Here we have on the left Khorshed, who marries Kekoo, and next to them is Khorshed's younger sister Nargesh. And here are the couple. Kekoo and Khorshed. It's 1944. They were married. It's a delightful story of how they met, which is covered in the film, but I'll just expand a bit on that. There was the famous socialite in Bombay called Bapsi Sabawala. Many of you must have heard of her. And she invited Khorshed to sell tickets at a tea dance. And Khorshed didn't manage to sell any. And then she said, this is a young man here. Why don't you both come to the function? And her son said to Kekoo, oh, you don't need to come. Just we'll buy your ticket and you go off and go with Khorshed and have a date with her. So allegedly they go off to view a film somewhere, and that's how they meet. Okay, so the two of them in 1944, I'll just give you a little bit about their background. This is on the left, we have Kekoo's family. In the middle, my grandfather Minocher and his wife Roshan, and there are the three sons. They had a fourth child too, Feroza, who's not in this picture. Kekoo standing at the back, he's the eldest son. And this is a photograph taken in Matheran, which was Roshan's family home. And we've had wonderful memories of this time. And, that's why I chose a photograph that comes from this place that's so beloved to everybody. And here on the right, we have 5 generations of the family. Kekoo in the middle, his father Minocher, his mother Shireen, and then her mother and her mother. So it's an extraordinary picture of 5 generations, and they came from Bharuch to Bombay. They were a very simple family. But Minocher's father had the opportunity of getting a license to sell tobacco and through the British, and that's how he started becoming a trader and made his money. This is Khorshed's family, a far more kind of sophisticated and illustrious family, apparently. This is my Mamawaji, Naval, Adenwala. He comes from the Adenwala clan, and they were direct descendants of Kawasji Dinshaw, the family that traded in Aden, Zanzibar, and then, in India. So she came from a very large family. They used to all live in Aden Hall. And there was Fuiji, her aunt, and her two brothers. And all these families used to live side by side on separate tables. Some were very pro-British, and her family and she were very kind of for the independence struggle. So they would have kind of at the dinner table, 2 separate tables kind of warring. And when she joined the Gandhi family, she was very, very relieved, because she felt that family was full of sort of feuds, and the Gandhi family was very loving. And also the Adenwala family was very into ritual and prayers, and they had to wear matabana, and she chucked that off going to school. And she was a kind of liberated young woman before her time. She was sent to Lady Irwin College in Delhi to study domestic science, but she was far more involved in Gandhiji's movement and the freedom movement, and she was telling stories about the Simon Commission. So she was sort of imbued with all the fervor of independence. So I just found these photographs which kind of demonstrate her her bolshi spirit. I just want to say that I want to also give more emphasis in this presentation to my mother, because I felt she was shortchanged in my film because we just didn't have enough footage to share her story. So I'm trying to expand, talking about her, because everybody knows about Kekoo. So here it's a picture about, those early times. So this is the early 40s. This is a picture in the late 50s when Kekoo and Khorshed are married, and this is their immediate family around them. Rashna is in the middle, the child in the middle. She's the second child, and Adil is sitting here trying to eat something. Kekoo in the middle, of course, and Khorshed by his side. So this was kind of a very typical setup that I grew up with. All these people were part of my life. My uncle Rusi, my aunt Feroza, and Dara here, who, as many people who knew Kekoo and Khorshed knew, was sort of the third musketeer, always 6 years younger to Kekoo, but always by his side in all the movements and adventures that they undertook. So here's a very interesting story, which I cover more in the film, but I just thought it's worth talking about. These are the Italian prisoners of war, and they were very close to our house in Kekee Manzil in Bandra. There was this camp, and Kekoo found them. He used to go always, he was a very gregarious personality. He'd go out and meet them and invite them to the house. I'll show you a picture later of the house. You'll see it's a large house. And every Sunday they'd come and cook. And and they'd have a very kind of expansive time. But here, this picture is very interesting because it's a portrait of all the prisoners, or many of them. And there's the artist here, Giovanni Pinto, who painted them. And they were they were artists themselves, many of them. And I think this is a key moment of Kekoo getting introduced to Western art and the notion of art. I mean, don't forget, he comes from a kind of trading merchant family. Art was not, on the syllabus. And therefore, the influence of these Italian prisoners of war, over a period of time while they were there, just can't be underestimated. So here is Kekoo with his father, Minoche. And what happens is, and this I talk about extensively again in the film, how they started a framing shop. He had gone to Cambridge, as young men in those days did, and he came back in 1939 for a holiday, and he could never get back again because the war started. The seas were mined. Grandfather, there was a chance meeting with a Belgian man, and they started a picture frame molding factory. And this was the shop that sold the frames. They reckon that picture frames are a good business because there'll be plenty of gods and goddesses in India to frame. So here's a picture of the early days in the shop. And here's a picture of my mother. At that time, her interests always, as I said, she was very influenced by the nationalist movement. She was much less Western in her taste. She was very much part of the new India, the new independent India. And she was a tabla player originally. She learned tabla, and then she started singing. And this is her singing with her tanpura. Her masterji would come every Thursday, ever since I can remember, right up till the age of 70 when she stopped singing. And that was very much part of her background, which she gave us, so we had the typical Parsi background and this Indian music, particularly me, I used to be dragged to all the concerts, and it's a kind of enduring love of Indian culture that we gained through our mother. So this is another, uh, uh, the characters in these, up here is my mother. So this is in these early days in the 50s. They used to have this frame shop, and they got involved with the artists there. And my father was very involved in something called the Bombay Art Society, and they'd have these exhibitions. And over there, I'm just going to praise a important influence. There were 3 Jewish emigres who were in Bombay at the time. And there's a picture of them later. These are crucial in engendering, again, this education in art and interest in art, because they were artists. There's Professor Langhammer and Rudy von Leyden and Schlesinger, who was a big dealer. And they had money and they wanted to support this artistic group. I'll talk about that later. But over here are some of the artists. There was always this interest in bringing people in. And here, this is Kekee Manzil outside, and the artist Heba over here, Nayak and other people who were always welcome in Kekee Manzil. This is Professor Langhammer's wife, Katie Langhammer. But there's some other pictures of him. Okay, so side by side with this burgeoning interest in art through the frame shop, through encouraging the movement, is something very significant that happens to them in 1952. I think it's in 51 or 52, they visit Switzerland. They go on a kind of, holiday, and they land up in Switzerland, in Montreux, and they go up from Montreux up into a place called Mountain House, and they literally chance upon the center of the moral rearmament movement. Now, in the 50s, this is a really important movement around the world, and also for my parents. Now, many of you would not have heard of MRA. We all grew up, our generation grew up knowing about it. It is moral rearmament of morally rearming you, a citizen, from the inside. So their 4 principles were honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. And you got daily guidance, and you wrote down the guidance. Now, this was criticized for being a kind of CIA-infected movement, very Christian. So there's a lot of criticism about it. People kind of really dismiss it and poo-poo it. But I want to explain the significance of what my parents took from it, because they were always sort of citizens. They had this notion that they lived in this world to make it a better place. And at my father's memorial, the curator Ranjit Hoskote made a very interesting statement. He sort of talks about the principles of Zoroastrianism, good thoughts, good words, good deeds, and translates that sense that every Zoroastrian had. In the case with my parents, who weren't particularly practicing, in the rituals of Zoroastrianism, but they had imbibed its ethics. And that's what MRA was extremely attractive to them. And so they were one of the first people who brought it to India. And this is the place later. Before it was built, there was a big plateau building built in Panchgani called Asia Plateau. So that tree still stands, and the whole building is made as you can see over here around it. And I was very much their MRA child. I was born literally, at the same time that they met the movement, and I was pushed into the summer camps, and I resisted it very much as a child. I used to find it very annoying because of all this goodiness. And also I lost my mother. She'd run off to these meetings in the afternoon. And so I was quite resentful to it. But today I step back and look at their interest and see how it kind of shaped them as people. So one of the big proponents in India who took it on was Rajmohan Gandhi. You'll hear more about him later from Shireen, but Rajmohan is Mahatma Gandhi's grandson, and he was like the leader in India. And these are some of the people. There's Rajmohan here, and many of the David Young, Rusi Lala, these Kalpana Sharma. My parents, I couldn't find a picture with my parents in it, but these were very much their cohorts and coevals at the time. Yeah, so the MRA troops would come to Bombay and they would bring plays, that's one of the ways that they would use social change. They'd go around to schools and they had these wonderful songs that children would sing, like, when I point my finger at my neighbor, there are three more pointing back at me. So we all grew up with all these, instead of nursery rhymes, these MRA songs. And these were the groups that used to visit. And my uncle Dara, this is his house, would put up many of these people. There's my great-grandmother, Shireen Gandhi, and from that, the fact that she's there dates this picture to just around that time, 1952, 53. Okay, now going back to the other love, which is art. This is Kekoo with his factory manager, Nissim Ezekiel. Now, many of you may know Nissim Ezekiel as a poet, but a poet can't pay the bills always. So Nissim worked for Chemould as the manager, and he brought a really a refined sensibility, I should say, a poet's sensibility to my father, and encouraged him really in all his adventures in promoting artists. So, and here is the famous artist studio, which was like the first gallery. The whole Bombay art world would meet over there, and it's described very well in, the artists themselves talk about it in the film, which you'll see next week, hopefully, where nobody ever introduced themselves. They just knew each other. And I think that was like the catalyst for the modern art movement there. Yeah. So here are the artists who are very, very significant. You have M.F. Hussain here. You have Ara, Bakre, Gade, Souza, yeah. And they were what's known as the progressive art movement. They kind of rejected they all came from many of them came from the J.J. School of Art, and they were kind of making a image for the new nation, rejecting the kind of academic models that were taught by the British in the art schools. So they're a really significant group, and Kekoo befriended most of them, particularly Hussain and Raza, and their stories are told in more detail in my film, so I'm not going to go on. And here is Professor Langhammer, who was the great teacher and art critic at the Times of India, and he influenced again, his influence can't be underestimated, especially on people like Raza and the art school. He brought in a whole new way of applying paint to the canvas, and that carried on, and it's visible in their work that you'll get to see. What happens is that then this little art shop, which is in Princess Street, framing shop, and it still exists in Princess Street. The movement grew and grew, and by 1963, they were invited to open a gallery in this big public space. Many of you must know the Jahangir Art Gallery, right in the center of Bombay. And on the top, there's a tiny kind of, there were no windows. It was completely dark, and the architects transformed it magically. So that's where Gallery Chemould had, its the latest avatar of art went on there. And this is a picture of my grandfather and his brother and my grandmother at the opening of Gallery Chemould. I think I should just give you a view of our home where all this happened. The home was the hub, and then it spilt over to places like the gallery and the artist center. But in the early days, Kekee Manzil, that's why I chose it as the name of my film. And this picture particularly is next to it, is where my grandmother, Roshan, she was born here. And it's called Villa Vienna, and today it's the home of Shah Rukh Khan, and it's called Mannat, and there are huge walls all around it, and you can't see this picture at all. So it's a kind of rare sighting of Villa Vienna, which before Shah Rukh Khan was bought it, was always used by Bollywood movies, as a set. This is a little interlude that I didn't include in my film. Just before I left for the UK for my studies, there was one afternoon when there was an invitation for my parents to meet Faradiba, the Shah of Iran's third wife. And she was very interested in art, and they showed her lots of modern art, and she was fascinated, and she invited my parents to Iran. So there's a whole connection of Indian art going to Iran. And my parents were the guests of the Shah at that time and had a wonderful time. I just managed to get to Tehran. So I can't talk more about it, but it was a very, very interesting and unique exhibition of Indian art in Iran. Okay, now on to Shireen.
Hi, I'm Shireen Gandhi. I was born as the fourth child of my parents, Kekoo and Khorshed, but I often consider myself the fifth because only a year before, in 1963, was the birth of Gallery Chemould, which sort of introduced my mother into the world of business and the world of art to assist my father at that moment. Quite soon she became the forefront of the gallery. But having said that, because it was the birth of a gallery, the birth of the fourth child sort of became the fifth, slightly forgotten part of for part of their life. I mean this in the most affectionate way. I don't have any regrets, but there was a certain kind of feeling that the gallery came before me, if I look back at that moment in time.
And now you run the gallery. So would you like to say when you joined?
So because the gallery was such a big part of my mother and father's life, and at that point my mother, who obviously came into her own, when I think about her as a mother until and probably a housewife, I don't know, but until she ran the gallery, she didn't really have anything, but she really came into her own at age 42 or 43. And so being the sort of the last child, I was always, following them, and I didn't have any other companions really. So my parents, their friends, the gallery, what they did became my sort of world. So I think there was this kind of natural affinity to what they were doing, whether it was politics at age 10, when I was kind of following them around to political meetings, or artist studios, a lot of artist studios. My sort of coming into the gallery became possibly a natural transition from college, not really knowing what to do, so turning to something that I kind of felt comfortable in at that moment, age 21, 22. My mother has left behind a file of the most incredible letters that she wrote from, it starts in 1962, and it's a letter that she writes to Nehru, and she's taken you, Rashna, and her eldest son Adil to a film in Regal Cinema in Bombay, and before the film there is always a documentary, and it's called The Story of Kashmir. And she went to see it, and she said, I came out of the film and I was so perturbed by my children's reactions, because they turned so vehemently against Pakistan, and this film in a way was so dangerous. And she sort of addresses Nehru saying, you sir are going to be seeing this film today, I believe, and I would really like your thoughts on it, because right back in 1962 she's talking about the syncretic culture that is being broken apart, and how people are filled with hatred towards Pakistan. Nehru, of course, by the way, she handed over that letter at the airport, by hand. So she really, she got straight to him, and lo and behold, Nehru writes a really wonderful letter back. Wonderfully expressed letter, quite expressive about Pakistan and his sort of feelings of how the country has gone astray, and it's an interesting exchange, especially in these times. The way Nehru felt so vehemently angry and really spoke in a statesman-like voice. But it's a very telling letter. And these letters go on, she writes to Indira Gandhi in 1968. Of course, there's no reply from Indira, but almost everyone else, she writes to Jagjivan Ram, she writes to Ram Jethmalani, she writes to Sonia Gandhi. Sonia Gandhi she writes to for seeking, she says, it's really the time you've chosen Manmohan Singh as your Prime Minister. What a great gesture. It's a real time to say sorry. And Sonia Gandhi has written back a huge long one-page letter. So everyone almost has replied, because her voice is such a powerful voice of a citizen who truly believes in the cause, and she's so articulate, in the way she expresses herself, that almost no letter went unanswered. So it's quite an incredible sort of arc of history that she's followed, almost at the time that she becomes a gallerist. So it's almost at that moment that her articulation is expressed, and it goes on right up to, Gujarat riots and beyond. But it really traces very important moments in independent India's history. There were quite a few, strangely, as small as our community is, there have been quite a few Parsi artists that we've been connected to, that not we so much, not me, but definitely Kekoo and Khorshed. You think of Adi Davyarwala, you think of their own cousin, Pilu Pochkhanawala, you think of Geev Patel, who's a doctor, a doctor, and it has had a very, very promising practice, but continued to be a doctor and an artist, and an artist of great prominence. Then, of course, there was the wonderful Homi Patel, who was a very, very close associate of the art of the gallery, with his beautiful meditative paintings. And much, much later, there was Melli Gobai. Melli Gobai I kind of put into my era when I started at the gallery. Melli came back from New York in 1988, and that's about the time I came back from my studies in London. And I met Melli, of course, through my parents, through Mummy and Papa. But Melli was this affable, good-looking, very, very, charming man who would come to the gallery. And I became so fond of him and he of me that I thought he was probably a rich Parsi man who may not have been a very good artist. You think of artists as struggling, you think of artists as people who have sort of had difficult backgrounds, but here was this rather, well-to-do Parsi gentleman. But I remember my mother, who I always sort of looked to, saying to me one day, we must go and see Melli's. He's just come back from America. We must go and see his paintings and see whether we would like, because I think it would be quite a prestigious exhibition. I remember those words, and I was quite sort of taken by that. And we went to the studio, and actually it was love at first sight. As much as Melli was love at first sight, his paintings were absolutely love at first sight. I just absolutely loved the work. And we, Kekoo Khorshed, me at the time, who were a team, began to exhibit him in Gallery Chemould. And of course, every Melli exhibition was quite, it was theatrical actually, because he not only made paintings and we exhibited, but there was this whole thing about how it would be lit. And then every day he would come and change the lighting because it was never good enough. So Melli was quite, somebody who entertained, other than being charming and a very good artist. He was very, very funny as well.
So I'd like to show Melli's work now, because Shireen's talked very articulately about it. So this is an exhibition which is currently taking place at Chemould Prescott Shireen's gallery in Mumbai. It's a retrospective because Melli has passed on, and curated beautifully by Nancy Adajania and Ranjit Hoskote. Here's Melli with my mother. The dapper gent, always the most good-looking man in the room. Okay, so Pilu was my mother's cousin, and unfortunately, I don't have any illustrations here in the Isle of Wight of her work, but she was a very, very important sculptor, and one of the and a real, the close, very, very close to my mother. They were the same age practically. She died prematurely, and my mother always kind of felt very sad about her death, because she had so much to offer as a creative person. So this is her. She worked with metal, she had a big studio, and she had these huge sculptures. One of them was always visible on the Worli circle, the roundabout in Worli. But she's, again, someone who needs a lot more prominence and, having exhibitions and re-looking at her work, because she's forgotten, like her contemporary Adi Davierwala, two key sculptors of Indian contemporary art. Homi Patel was we don't have pictures of him, but these are the posters of the exhibition. But I'd just like to tell you a story of Homi. I was very close to him in Bombay at the time. We'd all hang around. I went to Elphinstone College opposite, and he was a very shy man who, you really had to get to know. And he did this extremely radical exhibition in about 1968 or 69, where all the paintings were completely white. You had to sit down and really look. And Khorshed had this idea of putting chatais on the floor of Gallery Chemould, and everybody had to come in, take off their shoes, sit down, and look at the paintings, And she had a song that she put on the a rag that she just you kept hearing on a loop, and this very, very quiet, meditative music and low lighting and sitting down and doing meditation. I mean, in 68, my parents were always into these kind of really far out ideas, and people really responded to this show. And I wish somehow there's more of a record of it, because I think it's one of the key shows, of the time. And Geev Patel, as Shireen mentioned, he's a doctor as well as a painter. And these 4 paintings at the back are 4 meditations on old age, which were shown at the 50th anniversary show. Shireen had about 4 or 5 shows at that time to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the gallery. Kekoo had already died, and my mother died 3 days after the show opened. So it was a very, very, significant time. Most amazing kind of coincidences is that this show was on death. The theme was death. I think Geeta had a premonition that this could happen. So these 4 paintings at the back are meditations. And here's Homi with there's Geeta, the curator of the show, Sudhir Patwardhan, Aditi, Geev here in a blue shirt, Anju Dodia and Meetu Sen sitting on the far right, and Shireen in the middle. And this is some more of Geev's work in the gallery. Yes, I believe Shanaz mentioned that they had a Geev talking about his paintings where he's very interested in wells in Gujarat. And that's why I've chosen these. You've heard about this, the well looking into a full moon. That for me is a quintessentially Parsi lady. I don't know why. That painting is just so powerful. And these are close-ups of the 4 meditations on old age. Okay, I move on to my sister Rashna now.
I'm Rashna in Hasli. I'm Kekoo and Khorshed Gandhi's eldest daughter, and I'm married to a Swiss, and I live between India and Switzerland. At the moment, I'm living in Switzerland because of the pandemic since the beginning of the 2021.
Can you tell us your involvement with Kekoo and Khorshed on different levels of what happened, especially with when you were in Switzerland? Can you tell us some stories?
Well, my father used to come to Switzerland a lot because he used to try to spread modern art through Switzerland, and he used to turn up here and meet gallerists and museum directors and try to promote Indian art here. So he used to just without appointments go and see directors and try to promote, because he was so convinced that Indian art had a story and had a impression of its own which he wanted, and he was so convinced that it was a story which had to be told. And he would spend months. Sometimes my mother used to wonder how he managed, because in those days we weren't even allowed to take US dollars out of India. And for 6 months he wouldn't come back because he was so involved in trying to find galleries for his art. And then he did manage always to have a show here or there, also in Switzerland. And then the rest of the paintings would be left behind with us, and we would have to transport them home, which was always a bother for us.
Can you tell us the story of the involvement which you were involved with ITA and his association with Swami Muktananda?
Well, he had a guru for many, many years, which was Swami Muktananda. And he used to go to the ashram because in the factory during Datta Samant's time, there used to be lots of strikes and stuff like that. And he didn't know how to cope with this kind of pressure with the workers. And he used to go off to the ashram to get a peace of mind or to get solace from the guru. And that 1979, there was a big conference of the International Transpersonal Psychology Conference in Bombay. And in those days, they didn't have an back office. So Muktananda asked Papa to give the gallery backspace where, all the phones and typewriters and telexes and stuff they could use there. So I was invited from Switzerland at that time to come back to attend the conference because I was involved in psychology here in Switzerland. And that was my first introduction to international transpersonal psychology in India. I didn't know what it was because the guru was invited, psychologists were invited, Mother Teresa was invited, our Parsi priest was invited. Bede Griffith was invited, Karan Singh was invited, a whole lot of mixture of people. I didn't understand what this psychology was about. And transpersonal psychology is going beyond the personal. It's had to have a spiritual background. And then from there, Stan Groff, who was the president, announced that each conference is invited to a different country. And if anybody wants to bring it to their own country, and I put up my hand and said we'd have it in Switzerland next, and that's how I started my whole psychology with transpersonal psychology.
Okay. Can you tell us how Kekoo then brought in Indian artists to Ganeshpuri?
Well, Papa used to go to Ganeshpuri, as I said, to find solace, and he used to always take whichever artist was around, he used to grab and take to Ganesh Puri. And many of them, found a place also in Ganesh Puri. For instance, Ambadas, who had come from Delhi, he became, he used to go to Ganesh Puri because he also liked the atmosphere there. And then Baba came and opened his show also in Chemould when Ambadas had his opening. And in this way, he used to take artists there. Then when I got married or wanted to get married, my grandfather was, of course, a very devout Parsi and did not at all approve of me marrying a foreigner. And he said to my father that if you allow her to get married, you have to leave the house, because we all lived in a joint family. And so I said to Papa, look, when you have problems like this, you always go to Baba, so let's ask his advice. So we went off to Ganesh Puri, and Baba Muktananda said, but where's the boy? I can't give my consent without seeing the person. So Bernard was invited to come back to India, and when we went to see him, he had one look at him and said that, well, don't look at his color of his skin, Gandhi. His heart is all right. I'll marry them in the ashram here. So my father said, but my father will throw me out of the house. So he says, no, you tell him that I'll marry them here. And so my father said, now you go and tell the old man. So when I went up to my grandfather to tell him that Baba is going to bless our wedding, and all I want is your Ashirvad. He said, हाँ पर तुम्हारी छाती पर बंदूक मुकी ने हमारा आशीर्वाद ले. But all was well once that passed, and he gave his consent, and he was very graceful, my grandfather. They collected Warli art, and Jivya Soma Mashe was one of the artists that Mummy really promoted from the beginning, and they had a very close relationship with him. And she used to say that, I want you to paint your stories. And then they started really diversifying their art by drawing their stories, and she brought out the first book on Warli paintings in those years. And she used to go collecting stuff from Gujarat and other places, Orissa and so on, whenever she went on trips, to promote that kind of art in the art shop at the back.
Kekoo and Khorshed were the first commercial gallerists who actually put tribal art on the map in terms of being available. And so, there were other people who had already sort of discovered him, but the person who did, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name right now, but he was the one who introduced Kekoo and Khorshed to Jivya, and Jivya was like the master craftsman of Warli painting. He lived in a small village outside, just on the border of Maharashtra and Gujarat, called Dhanu. And Jivya Soma Mashe, he was kind of head of the village at the time, but also very, very talented. So they would be painting, their craft was on the walls of their homes. That was where it began and ended. And soon it sort of, it started getting recognized, and my parents completely, embraced this form of art, Warli art, and put it on the map really, and began to exhibit it, and they had the first Chemould publications in art was dedicated to the art of Jivya and his family, and it was written by Yashodhara Dalmia. So their interests was not just contemporary. They were the first people who really brought art and craft into a contemporary space.
My husband was a diplomat and then stayed on in India and became a journalist, and then we moved to Delhi. We lived there for 27 years, and in Delhi my father used to turn up because for about 14 years he was intent on turning the Kausji Jahangir Hall into the National Gallery because he felt Bombay deserved a National Gallery space. And Bombay didn't have the finances in those days to convert that building into a National Gallery. So he used to come to the NGMA in Delhi to try and get funds, and then he would have calls right up to the Prime Minister's office and cultural minister, and we'd get phones from all over by saying, Kekoo Gandhi on the phone, and this is the Prime Minister's office. And I would say, Papa, what are you up to? He said, well, we must get that NGMA building. So he used to come in, for years on end to see that project through. NGMA did happen in the end, and Bombay got its National Gallery of Modern Art. And he was, of course, on the board of the NGMA in Bombay. And he used to use his involvement. He was also a member of the Paramparik Karigar group in Bombay, which used to promote artists and textiles and different things from all over India. And he, again, like my mother, Khorshed, they didn't differentiate between tribal artists and artists of the city. And so he used to really try to see how they could be promoted in spaces like, for instance, the Goethe Institute Gallery or the NGMA, to get those spaces for those artists.
I'm going to just mention that following on from the NGMA, one of the exhibitions that my parents did, well, my mother really did, was a portrait of a community. Now, this is a topic that needs its own space, its own hour. I don't want to say too much just now, but the idea was to get all the old paintings that were in Agyaris and Atasperams in Bombay and show them, because Khorshed felt that they were so wonderful and rare and couldn't be seen by anybody. Some of them were very important painters. And it was an opportunity for the city of Bombay to view this. So she got this committee together. So Homai Modi, Khorshed Gandhi, Pilu Kupa, Bajor Poonawala, Rustam Jijiboy, Firoza Godrej, Sam Manekshaw, Sakar Mistry, Melli Gobai, Dara Gandhi, and Priya here, Mohole Jaradi. She was a student who had come back, a history student, and she was given the project of writing the book. And they became wonderful friends and, real collaborators. Today she's got a big post in Singapore Museum. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that exhibition because that was my mother's particular, that's something she did on her own. Without Kekoo just came and blessed them. And she was 82 when she organized it. That's why she knew she needed the support of this big community for it. And there's a wonderful book that goes with it. Unfortunately, it's out of print, but anybody who has a copy of the book should hold on to it.
One of the things that my parents did a lot was sort of mix their life of politics with their art life. And I remember we had an exhibition of, we didn't have actually an exhibition in the gallery. We kind of almost didn't do anything at the time. We became a fundraising center for Rajmohan Gandhi, and we sort of didn't feel like delving into the art, and I got quite involved with them because we became a kind of campaign office in Bombay, and collected a lot of money. Lot at the time, people were contributing whatever. We opened an account in Hong Kong Bank for him, I remember, and I got so involved that there was, he needed any kind of help from local or people from outside. So a lot of friends volunteered to go to Amethi, where he was standing against Rajiv Gandhi, interestingly, at the time. I think their morals stood for whatever it was. Today, if we have a certain position, at the time we also had, a position. They also had a position, and so I went to Amethi, quite like I was all of 24, 25, and was sort of shipped off with another friend on the train. And then I was there, and I remember it was quite a frightening experience, because it was full gundaism. It was during the time of elections, so I had to man I was one of the people helping. I don't know how much use I was, but it was a memorable experience and quite frightening, to be amongst sort of political gundaism in booth capturing and things that were already happening way back then.
Would you like to talk about their political involvement of Mummy and Papa when they were against the emergency of Indira Gandhi and all these political prisoners who were being imprisoned, and then she was hiding a political prisoner in our home?
Yeah. So it's at the same time when Adil was away in America, and so again that flat upstairs was available. So during that time, people were political activists were moving from one house to another absolutely anonymously. So nobody else could know, who. In our home, we were hiding somebody called Jaya, and Jaya again became, because I was alone in the house, Jaya became my great friend. I had no idea who Jaya. I had no idea of who she was or why she was there, but she was there, and and they would quietly go in and out, and I don't know. I don't remember being suspicious of anything. I remember my old grandfather was quite suspicious and wondered what was happening, with people coming in and out. Anyway, in that whole political milieu, there were names that one constantly heard, and one of them was a name called Mrinal Gore. So I knew Mrinal Gore, I knew Jaya, I knew Sadanand Varde, I knew all these people, but had no clue who was who. Jaya leaves our home and goes to another house of our neighbor called Mr. Khandekar, and there she gets arrested, and Mr. Khandekar as well. So it was literally by the slip of a hair that my parents didn't go to jail, and then much later, when the Janata Party won the elections, Mrinal Gore won with thundering, she would lead, and we had a big party for Mrinal Gore, and lo and behold, Jaya, my friend who lived upstairs, was Mrinal Gore, and I had absolutely no idea, and till today I kind of remember the surprise and shock that, oh, Jaya was Mrinal Gore, because I only knew Mrinal Gore's name and Jaya as person. So it was a memory that I kind of hold close to my.
So his contacts with the NGMA also were very important when their last big exhibition that my parents did when they were active in the gallery was Portrait of a Community, where they were asked, my father used to restore paintings, and because of the shop, the Chemould shop, where they used to reframe paintings and see, which were damaged. And he saw some of the Gigi Boy paintings which were damaged, and then he had the idea that why don't we do he always had the ideas, but my mother used to always carry them through. And they said, what a lovely idea to restore paintings and have an exhibition before we return them. So the idea came to do a portrait of a community, which was the Parsi community, because many of the portraits in many of the agyaris and the buildings that the Parsis had built had portraits of the people who had sponsored those buildings. And so they collected all those paintings and had, if they needed restoration, they were restored. But there was a huge exhibition at the NGMA of Portrait of a Community, where a whole group of Parsi community people gathered together and helped my parents form a committee, and they had this wonderful exhibition called Portrait of a Community for the Parsis. And the Parsi communities came in hordes to see that exhibition.
Okay, so it's time to wrap up, and I just want to end with a funny story of my father and the Mohalla committee. So they have this Mohalla committee that day, and it's on Independence Day, on Republic Day, on 26th January. Now I'm in Bombay, and he gets all the Mohalla committee members to move to Villa Vienna next door, which is Mannat, Shah Rukh Khan's house. And we were trying to organize something to meet Shah Rukh. And my father, the eternal trickster, always playing his games, juggles two balls. He gets us, the people who wanted to meet Shah Rukh, to sit in Kekee Manzil, while he got all the Mohalla committee people to meet Shah Rukh and tell their grievances post the riots. And then when that was over, he told them, now go, the next lot can come. So this is just a funny moment I wanted to share. So these are some pictures of my parents when they're very old, with all their grandchildren, with their 5 grandchildren. This is kind of looking at the state of them. It's just before they died. Next. This is a thing I talk about quite extensively in the film, where the artist Hussein made a big backdrop for Shireen's wedding with all these Zoroastrian symbols. So this is Shireen and Khorshed when they got married in 1991. And it was brought out again when Shireen's 2 children, Atyan and Arish, had their Navjot, because it was very topical to have these Zoroastrian symbols instead of just a stage. This is my brother Adil, who everybody wants to hear from, hopefully next week. It was at his wedding in 1973. And this is just some pictures with me and my mother when she'd go to do her shopping for her art shop. We went and lived in a village in Banni. And this was times with my father. He came back and he took me to his alma mater in Cambridge at Pembroke College. I think this was around 1974. And this is a big family photograph of the whole family, taken again just before they died, whole extended family. So this is how I remember them, Khorshed and Kekoo. They continue to inspire us, and their stories live on.
Thank you so much. This is lovely. Thank you, Behroze. Thank you, Rashna. Thank you, everybody. There have been some questions. There have been lots of comments from your cousin Dadi, all about Aidenwala Hall and all the other stories you should have told, but we're way over time. There's just one question which is very intriguing, and he says that one of you, please, Behroze, tell us about the time Chemould created frames with a crinkle white finish. Does anybody know anything about that?
I mean, that's it's a question that Adil will have to answer.
Okay, so now Adil has
I can answer it right now also.
Okay, please, Rashna.
Yeah, they used to take a kind of a rag and put the paint on it and then crinkle it and like a sponge go along the whole frame.
Oh.
I remember seeing it very clearly in the days of the factory.
Okay, and of course, Dadi also wants to tell everybody that the Aidenwalas were a part of the independence struggle, and Kekoo Dinsha, of course, was a close friend of Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, that is Dadi's writing chemical molding. And there are some stories he wants to. Rashna, please speak about the train your parents were on way to Delhi just after Indira Gandhi's assassination.
Yeah, they were they were on the train the day that she was murdered, and then they were stopped outside Delhi, first in Bhopal, and they were told that if you don't want to go back to Delhi, they can get the refund and they can get off. So they didn't know what was going on. They knew that she had been shot, and so they thought it was dangerous to go on, and they got down. The ticket collector came and said, "No, Yola Parsis, you can get on again. It's more, it's safe for you all to go." So they went back into the wagon. And when they were out just before outside Delhi, the train was stopped. And then they saw the other train where dead bodies were taken out and so on. And there was a Sikh gentleman in that compartment. And he was so scared. He didn't know what to do because he was watching the other bodies being pulled out of the other train who were Sikhs. My mother started to do a chant to help him to so they calm down. And the whole compartment was chanting, and nothing happened to him.
That was the only compartment that had no attack.
How absolutely lovely. Your parents were remarkable people, and I hope that this has inspired others to also read about them, come and visit the gallery, and of course be in touch with you all. Please be with us next week. And I hope you'll be able to get your brother to come also. Mata?
Yes, we have Nigat Mir. I'm requested Nigat to unmute. Yes, all right.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nighat Mir, and I'm the chairperson of the Imran Mir Art Foundation, which is for my late husband. And I have two things. First of all, I am absolutely full of admiration for the Parsi spirit. And secondly, I've also had the pleasure of having my husband exhibit at the NGMA, and it's the most fabulous place that's been created by your family, and it's a great gesture. But you have to also know that on this side of the border in Pakistan, the Parsis are great supporters of art and all things creative, and they play a very vital role in our society and in our art scene. And I'm sure you must be aware of some of the names, the Kawasjis and the Dalals and the Minwalas. And it's just that there is something about the Parsi spirit that is so unique and so fantastic that I don't know whether I could describe it, but I just want to take my hat off to all of you for all the fantastic work that your parents did and you've been doing over this period of time. And we had come to NGMA. I had the pleasure of, the beautiful exhibition had come from Pakistan to called Beyond Borders. And I do wish that we can come again, or maybe you can come, and, it would be just wonderful. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Nigat Mir. I think this would really fill the souls of Kekoo and Khorshed with great joy, because I think this is exactly what was written in that letter to Panditji in 1962. And that letter is quite remarkable. I read it carefully. And that's exactly what they wanted: one humanity and no borders. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And please do be with us next week, all of you, to watch the movie and hopefully see the brother who's on the stud farm. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone. And God bless. Take care. Thank you, Behroze. Thank you so much, Rashna. Thank you, everybody.